If I were to use one word to describe Walter, I would use the word global. Would you?
Oh,
Did
yes.
you want to comment on that? That his, well, for example, as you said, he marched with Martin Luther King, with Chavez, went to Berlin, India. But you're saying he could do those things because he had good union contracts and good grievance procedure. Am I putting words in your mouth?
That's part of it. That's part of it. But also, he was a great educator. One of my favorite anecdotes about Walter is that one time when I was at his home, when I was his administrative assistant, when we got through the business for the day, I said, "You know, Walter, I've got a question I want to ask you." Now, this would have been in the mid-1960s. I said, "You've been president of the union now for about 20 years. What would you say, in your judgment, was your greatest achievement as president of the union?" And without blinking an eye, he turned to me and he said, "Irv, I think I'm a good educator," which is precisely what he was, aside from being a brilliant strategist, a man with social vision. He knew how to educate people to a point of view which related to the broad issues of society and the need for people working together, living together, being together, helping each other. And in that sense, he had a global view which went outside the borders of our union, outside the borders of the country itself.
And even the routine adult education of learning the grievance procedure and how to file grievances. Do you want to comment on that educational process?
Well, that, of course, is one of the requirements of a union educational process. I, for instance, when I was servicing local unions, made a point of holding education classes for committeemen and other classes for the members on issues involving the contract, its interpretation, what its provisions mean, how to use the grievance procedure, but also the broad issues in which the union was involved on a national and worldwide basis. Each of us, in turn, as staff representatives, felt an obligation to do this.
Now, I remember in that time, union members often saying, keep the union out of politics and keep politics out of the union. I also heard Walter talk about the relation of the ballot box and the bread box. Would you tell a little about what the efforts were made to get union members to realize the importance of their political activities?
Well, the union, right from its early period, but it was emphasized even more during Walter's period as president, had a citizenship department. As a matter of fact, his brother Roy Ruther was director of that department. Its purpose was to bring to the forefront the importance of politics, the importance of issues of a legislative nature to the workers, to the communities in which they live, to the nation as a whole. And so there was a great effort with staff assigned for this, region by region, all over the country, to meet with local union officials as well as local members and impress upon them the importance of the ballot box and the bread box. And by the way, we had a very important issue that told that story better than the usual. When we negotiated supplementary unemployment benefits in 1955, the idea was that unemployment compensation was there, and the SUB would be in addition to unemployment compensation up to a given percentage of what would have been the ordinary income. Well, there were a few states which took the position that as long as people were receiving unemployment SUB, they could not receive unemployment compensation. And we had the task at that point of getting the legislatures in those states to reverse their position, which we succeeded in doing. Again, we were able to establish in the minds of our membership that the importance of politics and legislative activity tied in with collective bargaining, so that in the final analysis in those states, people could get both unemployment compensation and SUB when they were laid off. This is a good lesson to learn.
That was a good bread and butter issue.
Oh, absolutely.
Now, I want to go into the really rough part of the union factionalism. Certainly, that's something everyone in the UAW was involved in a leadership position. Do you want to go into the history of the factionalism within the UAW, how it finally got resolved, and what the effect has been?
Okay, well, following our departure, so to speak, and from the original unionization, moving into an independent operation within the CIO, it became quite evident that there were strong differences of opinion. On the one side, there were those who themselves were not members of the Communist Party necessarily, but who were being given enormous political support by members of the Communist Party active within the Union. And on the other hand, there were those who belonged to what we called the Reuther Caucus, and I was one of them when I was in the shop. I was a member of the Reuther Caucus right from the beginning, who opposed communist domination and felt that we have to make our own way, so to speak, unrelated to what was good or bad for the Soviet Union and the Stalinists. That led to a very, very serious factional fight within the Union. On the one hand, those who felt that they needed the input, so to speak, from the communists, and from a political point of view, obviously, it meant votes. On the other, the Reuther group, and we called it a Reuther Caucus at the time, who took the position that that kind of influence is not designed for the benefit of the workers, it's designed for the benefit of the Soviet Union. Let's talk about workers' problems and deal with workers' problems. And that's where the difference lay. Now, that doesn't mean that leadership like R.J. Thomas or George Addis, who were supported within their own caucus by Communist Party elements, were themselves members of the party. They were not. But the fact is that that is where a good deal of their political power came from. This was finally resolved in this way. In 1946, Walter ran for president against R.J. Thomas, a very, very close race at the convention in Atlantic City. And he won with the support of the Reuther Caucus by a very narrow margin. I think it was 40-odd votes difference out of some 10,000. But by 1947, he had been able to pull together sufficient support that in that convention, the overwhelming majority of the executive board came out of the Reuther Caucus, and they were elected. And that then solidified the political infrastructure of the Union, so that we could pay a heck of a lot more attention to collective bargaining and members' benefits and members' wages and standard of living and working conditions, without constantly bickering and fighting internally about who is going to dominate the political.
Well, what were the specific issues between the... It's hard for people to realize Walter Reuther was considered the right wing and not the left wing. But what were the specific issues that would come up?
You know, you mentioned left wing and right wing, and these were unfortunate phrases, quite frankly. Walter was by no means what one would call a right winger. What he did, in effect, was to argue vigorously that we've got to pay attention to members' problems and move together relative to those as a union. What were the differences in the issues? Let me put it this way. When I was in the local union, we had a few members of the Communist Party within the local. And their argument constantly had to do with, what do we do as a nation which is good for the Soviet Union? Now, they didn't say this explicitly, but that's what it amounted to. So, for instance, when the Soviet Union joined with Germany against Poland, they supported that. We did not. When Germany marched into the Soviet Union, again, it was, well, we've got to go behind the Soviet Union to support them. And we said, yeah, but this is now a different base from which we operate, not simply because it happens to be the Soviet Union and the Communist Party. So that the differences of opinion that were expressed during that period of time were differences as between what is the best thing for the workers within our national scene, as against the Communist Party, which was constantly arguing what's the best thing for the Soviet Union and how do we bring that kind of improvisation, or whatever you want to call it, into our setting.